The message came without warning. No great war fleets announcing their arrival with streaks of light across the night sky. No hovering alien emissaries beaming down in shimmering displays of grandeur. Just a transmission, cold, precise, final. People of Earth, you stand no chance. Your technology is primitive. Your weapons obsolete. The Galactic Council demands your immediate and unconditional surrender. Refuse, and you will be eradicated. The voice was inhuman, yet oddly smooth, carefully modulated to sound neither aggressive nor compassionate. It carried the weight of a verdict already rendered, a judgment passed upon an inferior species. No elaboration, no justification, just inevitability. And then came the images. The entire solar system's orbital defense network, from Earth's antiquated spy satellites to its highest-class military stations, had been hacked. Every screen, every holographic display, every data feed now showed a singular, unshakable truth. They were here. The Zalari fleet hung like an unnatural eclipse above the moon, blotting out the familiar cratered surface with its dark, angular forms. Ships of impossible size, bristling with alien weaponry, organized in brutal precision. These were not explorers. They were not diplomats. They were an execution squad. For the first few minutes, the world stood still. Every major capital, every war room, every home with access to the broadcast sat in stunned silence. Then chaos. Governments scrambled, trying to reach one another in a tangle of encrypted calls and emergency meetings. Some wanted surrender. Earth had never stood against an enemy of this scale before. Others, the idealists, the fools, thought diplomacy could still be an option. And then there were the military minds, the ones who knew exactly what this meant. They had seen this pattern before. A technologically superior force arriving without explanation, issuing a single demand. It was how human empires had expanded for millennia. This was nothing new, except now humans were on the other side of the conquest. Deep within the underground military complex known only as Blackrock, General Elias Grant stood before a holomap, his fingers tapping against the steel table in rhythmic tension. Around him, high-ranking officials and military strategists debated in increasingly desperate tones. "There is no scenario in which we win a conventional war," one of the intelligence officers stated flatly. "Their fleet dwarfs our combined forces by every measurable standard." "Then we don't fight a conventional war," Grant said. His voice, gruff from years of barking orders in war zones, cut through the noise. A few turned to him, skeptical. "Then what do you propose?" For the first time since the invasion began, the old general allowed himself a slight smirk. "We bring in Dr. Carter." Far beneath Antarctica's frozen surface, where no satellite could penetrate, where no government had full oversight, an impossible project had been underway for nearly 2 decades. Dr. Evelyn Carter stood before a console, staring at an equation that had no right to exist. The singularity drive. It wasn't a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It wasn't a bomb, or a shield, or an energy field. It was something beyond. It had started as a theoretical impossibility, a flaw in quantum mechanics that shouldn't have been there, an inconsistency in the laws of reality itself. Most physicists dismissed it. The ones who didn't went mad trying to prove it. Carter had gone one step further. She had built it. A device that could alter the fundamental rules of physics within a controlled radius. Not just bending reality, but rewriting it. A ship that couldn't be damaged? It could make that possible. A bullet that should never penetrate an energy field? It could make that happen. A civilization that thought itself untouchable? It could bring them to their knees. The problem was that it had never been tested beyond microscopic applications. The potential for catastrophic consequences was immense. And now there was no choice. Evelyn's hands tightened into fists as she replayed the alien ultimatum in her mind. The faces of the team around her reflected her own emotions, a mix of fear, exhaustion, and something else. Something dangerous. Defiance. Raj Patel, her lead engineer, spoke first. His voice was hoarse, as though he had been holding back panic since the moment the invasion began. "We're really doing this?" Evelyn exhaled slowly. "Yes." A few exchanged uneasy glances, but no one objected. They had all known this day might come. They had all known what they were building was never meant to be contained in a laboratory forever. She turned to Patel. "Status." "The drive is at 40% capacity," he said. "Beyond that, we're in uncharted territory." Evelyn nodded. They had spent years theorizing what might happen if they pushed beyond that limit. The equations suggested stability, but equations had never encountered something like this before. But there was no time for hesitation. The first Zalari attack was already descending upon Earth. She pressed the final command. In orbit, the Zalari had begun their assault. A single energy cannon, meant to serve as a demonstration rather than outright annihilation, fired upon the city of New York. The blast never landed. Halfway through its descent, the crackling energy unraveled, dispersing harmlessly into the sky like mist caught in the wind. Confusion rippled through the fleet. The commander, a Zalari warlord named Varek, narrowed his slit-pupiled eyes at the readings before him. "What is this?" he demanded. "Fire again." A second shot. A third. A dozen. Nothing. The laws of reality, which had governed their weapons flawlessly across 1,000 conquests, were now betraying them. Then came the counterattack. A single human fighter jet, nothing more than a primitive relic in their eyes, fired an outdated missile toward one of the Zalari cruisers. It should have been an insult. Instead, the missile struck and the cruiser exploded. Not dented. Not damaged. Destroyed. Panic seized the Zalari fleet. Shields, once thought impenetrable, failed without explanation. Weapons misfired or ceased functioning altogether. Systems shut down, unable to comprehend the impossible distortions taking place within their own vessels. This is not possible," a Zalari officer stammered. Varek's hands curled into fists as realization dawned. "They're changing the rules." In the depths of Blackrock, Evelyn Carter let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "It's working," she whispered. For the first time in history, Earth was not just surviving an invasion. It was winning. The first Zalari warship fell in a silent eruption of fire and twisted metal, the explosion swallowed by the vacuum of space. A vessel engineered to withstand planetary sieges had been undone by a human missile, a primitive, laughable weapon by galactic standards. And yet, it had struck with impossible force, as if the laws of physics had betrayed their creators. On board the Zalari flagship, Supreme Commander Varek stood motionless, his reptilian pupils narrowing to slits as he observed the battlefield unfolding on the massive display before him. Ships flickered, their energy shields collapsing without cause. Weapons misfired, their targeting systems looping into nonsense calculations. Even the fabric of space seemed to warp subtly, turning the Zalari's technological superiority into an illusion. "This is not possible," one of his officers hissed, her scaled hands dancing across a control panel that refused to obey. "Their weapons should be ineffective," Varek finished coldly. He turned his gaze toward Earth, a world that, mere hours ago, had been nothing more than a footnote in the Galactic Council's long history of conquest. Now it had become something else entirely. "Find out what they've done." His voice was calm, but the weight behind it sent the bridge into a frenzy of activity. Yet no analysis, no scan, no desperate recalibration of their systems could provide an answer. Earth had twisted reality itself. Beneath Antarctica's frozen wasteland, Dr. Evelyn Carter's hands hovered over the control panel of the Singularity drive, her pulse a hammering rhythm against her ribs. The air in the underground lab felt electric, charged with the weight of something vast and unseen. The device hummed softly, an anomaly contained in a metal shell, a black box of equations that defied logic. "We need to stabilize it," Patel warned. Sweat clung to his brow as he monitored the cascading variables streaming across his screen. "This is bigger than we ever tested." Evelyn barely heard him. She watched the battle play out in real time, human pilots maneuvering their aircraft with newfound confidence, their missiles and bullets tearing through enemy ships like they were made of paper. The Zalari had ceased their attack entirely, their fleet now struggling just to remain intact. "We have seconds before they recalibrate," Patel pressed. "If they figure out what's happening." "They won't," Evelyn said, though uncertainty knotted in her stomach. The Singularity drive didn't shield Earth in the way conventional defenses might. It didn't deflect attacks or reinforce hulls. It did something far more insidious. It rewrote probabilities. The missile that should have bounced harmlessly off the Zalari cruiser? The drive had nudged the odds in humanity's favor, making the impossible happen. One shift in probability, one subtle adjustment, and the universe obeyed. But the changes weren't precise. The deeper they pushed the drive's limits, the more unpredictable the results became. The console flickered. A warning. Patel cursed under his breath. We're overloading. Evelyn hesitated. If they powered down now, the Zalari would regain control. If they pushed further, the ground trembled. The lights dimmed. And for a brief, impossible moment, Evelyn felt as though something vast and unknowable was watching. "Shut it down," she ordered, forcing steel into her voice. Patel moved without hesitation. The hum of the Singularity drive faded into silence, the strange energy in the room dissipating like a breath held too long. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then a voice crackled through the communication system. "This is General Grant." His tone was steady, but Evelyn detected the edge beneath it. "The Zalari fleet is retreating." The words settled like an aftershock. Retreating. A species that had conquered entire civilizations without resistance was fleeing. The underground lab remained silent, save for the soft beeping of recalibrating monitors. Evelyn met Patel's gaze. The same thought passed between them. This was only the beginning. Aboard the Veil of Dominion, Supreme Commander Varek stood at the helm, his sharp claws tapping against the metal railing as he watched his fleet withdraw from Earth's orbit. Every instinct in his body rebelled against the retreat, but he could not fight a battle with an enemy that had unmade the rules of war itself. The Galactic Council had underestimated these creatures. He had underestimated them. "Order the fleet to regroup beyond the asteroid belt," he commanded. His officers obeyed without question, though he sensed their unease. Zalari did not retreat. They annihilated. And yet, here they were, abandoning what should have been an effortless conquest. Varek turned to his second-in-command, a strategist known for her ruthless efficiency. "Summon the council." His voice was quiet, but there was no mistaking the intent beneath it. Earth was no longer an afterthought. It was a threat. And the Zalari did not suffer threats to exist for long. The war, if it could still be called that, had ended before it truly began. The Zalari fleet, a force that had crushed empires and rewritten the destinies of entire civilizations, had fled before humanity's impossible defiance. Across Earth, euphoria reigned. News networks ran endless coverage of the battle, politicians proclaimed victory, and civilians flooded the streets in celebration. For the first time in human history, the planet was united, not by diplomacy or ideology, but by survival. But deep beneath the surface, where victory was measured not in headlines but in data, the atmosphere was anything but triumphant. Dr. Evelyn Carter stood before a console in the subterranean heart of Blackrock, her gaze fixed on the numbers scrolling across the screen. The data made no sense. The Singularity drive had been shut down, yet the anomalies continued. She had expected some residual effects, small distortions in probability, minor fluctuations. But this, reality itself was still shifting. A technician approached cautiously. "Dr. Carter, this just came in from Geneva." Evelyn accepted the tablet and swiped through the reports. The contents sent a chill up her spine. A diplomatic summit had been interrupted by leaked footage, video of a soldier who had survived an explosion unscathed. That, on its own, was remarkable. But what followed was impossible. The man had awakened, looked at his hands in unsettling curiosity, and asked a question that no normal person would ask. "What am I?" Evelyn set the tablet down with slow, deliberate movements. Across the room, Patel watched her warily. "It's getting worse, isn't it?" She nodded. "We didn't just disrupt the Zalari. We disrupted everything." Aboard the Veil of Dominion, Supreme Commander Varek stood in silent rage as the Galactic Council convened before him. 22 sovereigns, warlords, and rulers gathered in a circular chamber of cold, reflective obsidian, their forms flickering between holographic projections and physical presences. "The Zalari do not retreat," an insectoid sovereign clicked, her mandibles grinding. "And yet we did." Varek's voice was devoid of emotion, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. The High Arbiter, cloaked in iridescent shifting armor, remained motionless. When they finally spoke, their voice was measured, precise. "The humans have done something unprecedented. They altered the fundamental rules of engagement," Varek said. "Weapons ceased functioning. Probability skewed against us. They turned chance itself into a weapon." Another warlord, his body a mass of shifting blue energy, spoke. Then we obliterate them before they refine this power. No, the Arbiter's voice cut through the room. We wait. Varek's patience frayed. You would allow this? The Arbiter turned their masked face toward him. They do not yet understand what they wield. Their tone was cold, assured. And when they do, they will fear it. A silence settled over the chamber. The most dangerous enemy, the Arbiter continued, is one who turns their weapon upon themselves. Varek understood then. They would let humanity unravel itself. Let the singularity drive's consequences spiral beyond control. Let their fear grow until it consumed them. And when the time was right, when humanity begged for salvation from its own creation, the Council would grant it at a terrible cost. It was a patient cruelty, and it would work. On Earth, the first fractures in the illusion of victory had begun to show. In Berlin, a research facility reported an anomaly that should not exist. For exactly 3 minutes, an entire wing of the building had ceased to register on any sensors. No security footage. No electronic activity. The people inside claimed to have felt nothing, yet the timestamp data insisted that, for a brief moment, that section of reality had simply vanished. In Tokyo, a man stepped through what should have been a solid concrete wall, emerging unscathed on the other side. In California, a scientist accidentally wrote an equation backward, and it still produced a valid result. These incidents were dismissed at first. Statistical errors. Sensory misperceptions. But as reports multiplied, as the impossible became common, humanity's celebration curdled into something else. Fear. Evelyn Carter saw the change unfold in real time. At first, world governments had demanded more information, more tests, more understanding. Now they wanted control. Nations that had once collaborated now closed their doors. Rumors swirled that some governments were conducting human experiments, trying to understand if people who had survived the battle had been changed. And in Geneva, where the soldier who should have died still sat under observation, the unthinkable happened. The man did not sleep. He did not eat. His body showed no deterioration, no fatigue. And then, in the quiet hours of the night, he spoke a single sentence to his terrified observer. There are others. The weight of the discovery pressed down on Evelyn as she read the report. Across the world, other survivors of impossible circumstances were beginning to emerge. Some had walked away from fatal wounds. Others displayed subtle but unnatural abilities, heightened awareness, perfect recall, reactions that defied human limits. They were no longer anomalies. They were a pattern. The singularity drive had done more than repel the Zalari. It had left a mark upon reality itself, and humanity was no longer the same species that had begun this war. She exhaled slowly, forcing down the rising panic. Patel watched her closely. You're thinking it too, aren't you? She nodded. If it changed us this much in a single battle, she hesitated, staring at the monitor, at the endless stream of data that no longer obeyed human understanding. What happens if we ever use it again? Patel swallowed hard, but his expression was grim. It might not be our choice to make. Evelyn knew he was right, because out there, beyond the asteroid belt, the Galactic Council was watching, waiting. And when humanity's fear turned inward, when the first cracks in their unity became fault lines, they would strike. Not as conquerors, but as saviors. The illusion of victory was unraveling. What had begun as triumph had soured into uncertainty, and now that uncertainty was turning into something darker. The world, once united in celebration, was beginning to fracture under the weight of the unknown. Dr. Evelyn Carter had never been one for superstition, but she felt it now, a tension in the air, a shift in the fabric of things. The singularity drive had done something more than repel the Zalari. It had left its mark. And Earth, whether it knew it yet or not, was changing. She stood in the dim glow of her underground lab, staring at the latest reports. The anomalies were escalating. The man in Tokyo who had stepped through solid matter now claimed he could do it at will. The research facility in Berlin had suffered another event. This time, an entire section of the building had disappeared for 11 minutes before snapping back into existence as if nothing had happened. But the worst reports came from Geneva. The soldier, the one who had survived an explosion that should have incinerated him, was missing. The guards stationed outside his room swore they had never left their post. Security footage showed nothing but static from the moment he vanished. And he wasn't the only one. Across the world, survivors of impossible events were disappearing. Some were last seen behaving strangely, staring at their hands, speaking in cryptic fragments. Others simply ceased to exist, their apartments found empty, their belongings untouched. Patel entered the room, his expression tense. Another one gone. This time in Mumbai. Evelyn exhaled sharply. Who? Arjun Vas. He was caught in a building collapse during the battle. Rescuers pulled him out completely unharmed. No broken bones, no burns, not even a scratch. Patel hesitated. His wife swears she saw him dissolve into thin air. Evelyn's grip on the console tightened. Dissolve. She said his body flickered, like a bad signal. Then he was gone. Silence stretched between them. The lab was filled with the soft hum of machinery, the quiet sound of their own breathing. Patel spoke first. The singularity drive isn't off, is it? She had asked herself the same question 100 times. The machine sat powered down, its systems inactive, yet its influence remained. Probability was still bending in unnatural ways. The laws of physics, once absolute, now wavered at the edges. No, Evelyn admitted. I don't think it is. Patel ran a hand through his hair, frustration creeping into his voice. Then how do we shut it off? She had no answer. Above them, the world was beginning to panic. The anomalies were no longer contained to classified reports. Civilians were recording them, uploading footage that defied explanation. Videos of people vanishing mid-step, objects phasing through walls, time stuttering in small, impossible ways. Governments were scrambling. The same nations that had once worked together against the Zalari were now turning on each other. There were rumors of containment camps, of secret experiments to understand what was happening to those who had been changed. Fear was setting in. And fear, Evelyn knew, would tear them apart faster than any alien fleet. The Galactic Council watched. From their station beyond the asteroid belt, they observed the fractures forming across Earth. The humans had wielded something beyond their understanding, and now they were drowning in the consequences. Supreme Commander Varek stood before the High Arbiter once more. They are destabilizing. Their leaders fight amongst themselves. Their people are afraid. The Arbiter nodded slowly. They will turn on each other soon. Varek's claws curled at his sides. Then we strike. No, the Arbiter said, unshaken. Not yet. He stiffened. If we wait too long, they will adapt. They will break, the Arbiter interrupted, voice like steel. And when they do, they will beg for order. We will not take their world by force, Commander. We will offer them salvation. Varek stared at them, understanding dawning. You want them to surrender willingly. Not just surrender, the Arbiter murmured. We want them to see us as the only force that can save them. A cold certainty settled in Varek's chest. They would not come as conquerors. They would come as liberators. And humanity, blinded by its own unraveling, would welcome them. Evelyn was running out of time. Governments were no longer just asking for answers. They were demanding them. Military officials were calling for restrictions on those affected by the anomalies. Some were pushing for detainment, others for more extreme measures. They spoke in clipped, rehearsed phrases, contain the threat, assess potential dangers, ensure stability. But Evelyn heard what they really meant. We don't understand them. And what we don't understand, we fear. A message came through on a private channel. It was General Elias Grant. His face was worn, lines of exhaustion cutting deeper than she remembered. Doctor, he said, skipping the usual pleasantries, you need to tell me the truth. Are these changes permanent? Evelyn hesitated. I don't know. Then tell me this. Are they getting worse? She didn't answer. Grant's expression darkened. Some of my men are talking about drastic action. If we don't control this soon, we're going to see people start disappearing for different reasons. A chill ran through her. He didn't mean anomalies. He meant governments eliminating potential threats before they could escalate. We can't let that happen, she said. Then find me a solution, Grant said, his voice sharp. Because if you don't, someone else will. The screen flickered off. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned back to Patel, who had heard everything. "We need to find the missing ones," she said. "Before the wrong people do." Patel hesitated. "And if we do?" Evelyn met his gaze. "Then we find out what they've become." Because deep down, she already knew the truth. The singularity drive had not just changed the laws of physics. It had changed them. The world was unraveling faster than anyone could contain it. Governments were no longer just responding to crises. They were fighting against them. Cities descended into paranoia. Nations turned inward. The fragile unity forged in the war against the Zalari was crumbling under the weight of an enemy they couldn't see. But Evelyn Carter saw it. She saw it in the satellite images of the Atacama Desert, where something impossible was taking shape. She saw it in the reports of people who should have died but hadn't. People who were no longer entirely human. And she saw it in herself. It started as a flicker at the edge of her vision, an awareness that stretched beyond her immediate surroundings. Numbers in her research aligned before she even finished calculating them. She spoke before thinking, answering questions she hadn't yet heard. At first, she chalked it up to exhaustion. Then, she remembered the soldier in Geneva, the one who had stared at his own hands like they were foreign, the one who had asked, "What am I?" Now, she feared she was asking the same thing. Patel sat across from her, skimming the latest reports. "We've confirmed nearly 300 missing," he said, his voice tight. "All vanished without a trace. But they're not gone." Evelyn already knew what he would say next. "They're in the desert." The city in the Atacama had expanded. What had started as an empty stretch of wasteland had become a sprawling, pulsating construct. Buildings shifted in ways they shouldn't, angles that defied geometry, structures that stood despite lacking any visible support. Satellite scans showed no heat signatures, no energy readings, nothing. As far as conventional science was concerned, the place did not exist. And yet it was growing. She leaned back, exhaling slowly. "We need to go there." Patel hesitated. "Grant won't like that. He's not going to stop us." Patel's expression darkened. "No, but if we go, we might not come back." Evelyn didn't say what they were both thinking. Maybe they weren't supposed to. Across the world, another meeting took place, one far colder in its deliberations. General Elias Grant stood in the heart of an underground war room, the air thick with tension. Before him, world leaders and military officials from every major power convened via encrypted transmissions. Fear had replaced reason. "The situation is no longer manageable," a European diplomat said, her voice strained. "This isn't just about disappearances. We have reports of incidents, things we can't explain." "Define incidents," Grant said. The diplomat hesitated. Then, she sent the files through. Grant scanned them quickly. People were changing, and not just in ways previously reported. Some were altering reality on a small scale, water rippling away from their footsteps, shadows stretching in unnatural directions. Others had demonstrated impossible knowledge, speaking in languages they'd never learned, describing events that had yet to happen. And then there were the violent cases. A man in Moscow, detained after surviving a train crash, had stopped breathing for 3 hours, then suddenly sat up as if nothing had happened. He hadn't spoken since. A woman in Cairo had been shot by police during a riot. The bullet wound sealed itself before their eyes. She walked away. And in Nevada, an entire town had gone dark. The last transmission sent before all signals vanished was a single, chilling sentence. "We hear them now." Grant clenched his jaw. "Are you suggesting all of these people are a threat?" "We're suggesting we can't control them." A heavy silence settled over the room. Then, the Russian ambassador spoke. "We need containment." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. "Containment," Grant repeated. "You mean camps." "We mean security," the ambassador corrected. "This is not just a scientific anomaly anymore. It is an existential crisis. If we wait too long, we might not have a choice." Grant's fingers curled into fists. He had fought wars before. He had seen what fear did to people. This was how it started, the slow, creeping shift from control to eradication. But deep down, he knew they were right about one thing. The longer they waited, the worse it would get. Evelyn stood at the edge of the impossible city. The heat of the Atacama pressed against her, but the air inside the city was cool, weightless, like standing on the threshold of something unfinished. Figures moved between the alien structures, that changed. Their movements were smooth, deliberate, and yet not entirely unnatural. They were still human, weren't they? A familiar voice cut through the quiet. "We were waiting for you." She turned. The soldier from Geneva stood before her, his eyes no longer entirely human. They held something vast. "What is this place?" she asked. His gaze shifted toward the skyline. "The past. The future." His lips parted in something close to a smile. "The truth." Evelyn felt it before she understood it, a presence beneath the surface, something waking, something watching. The singularity drive hadn't created them. It had unlocked them. "We're not evolving," the soldier said. "We're remembering." A shiver ran through her. Remembering what? He stepped closer. What we were before they changed us. She knew who they were. The Galactic Council. The ones who had feared humanity's potential so much that they had buried it beneath layers of reality, kept Earth locked in a fragile, primitive state. But the war had cracked that cage open. And now, something older, something forgotten, was coming back. Evelyn swallowed hard. And the ones who vanished? The ones who didn't come here. The soldier's expression darkened. Not all of us remembered the same thing. Something moved behind the buildings. Shapes in the air, flickering in and out of existence. Whispers that did not belong to the living. The city wasn't just growing. It was calling something home. A low hum pulsed beneath her feet. Not sound, not vibration, a frequency that bypassed her ears and settled directly into her bones. Evelyn turned to Patel, but his face had gone pale. "We need to leave," he whispered. The soldier smiled. "You can leave," he said, "but it won't matter." She took a slow step back. "Why?" His luminous gaze met hers. "Because they're already here." Above them, the sky ripped open. A tear in reality, a wound that pulsed with impossible light. And beyond it, something vast, something waiting. Not the Zalari. Something older. Something the Galactic Council had tried to keep sealed away. Evelyn's heart pounded. The war with the Zalari had never been about conquest. It had been about containment. And now, humanity had set something free. The sky was torn open. A jagged wound in the fabric of reality pulsed above the Atacama Desert, spilling impossible light into the world. It wasn't color. It wasn't energy. It was something else entirely, something that didn't belong. And beyond it, something vast stirred. Evelyn Carter stood frozen, breath shallow, mind screaming at her to run. But where? The world had already changed. The laws that once governed existence were unraveling, and she had no idea if they could be repaired. The changed, those who had vanished and reappeared in this city of shifting geometry, watched in silence. Their expressions were unreadable, their bodies calm despite the apocalyptic scene unfolding above them. They had known this was coming. Evelyn turned to the soldier from Geneva, the man who had once been human but now carried something alien in his gaze. "What did you do?" He didn't blink. "We remembered." The humming beneath her feet deepened. The city pulsed, as though breathing in response to the sky's rupture. And then they came through. Not the Zalari. Not the Galactic Council. Something older. At first, they were shadows, stretching in unnatural directions. Then, figures, their forms shifting between solidity and something less tangible. They didn't move through space. They rewrote it as they passed. Evelyn's stomach twisted. The singularity drive hadn't created this. It had simply revealed what had always been hidden. Patel grabbed her arm, his grip firm, pulling her back toward the vehicle they had arrived in. "We need to go. Now." But the soldier, the one who had once been human, stepped in their path. "There's nowhere to run," he said, voice steady. "This isn't an invasion. It's a reckoning." Evelyn clenched her fists. "A reckoning for what?" "For what was stolen from us," the soldier said. He looked up at the sky, at the entities descending. "For what they took." The words sent a chill through her. The Galactic Council had feared humanity's awakening. They had called Earth a threat. But not because of what humans might become, because of what they had been. Above Earth, aboard the Veil of Dominion, Supreme Commander Varek stood before the High Arbiter, his hands clenched behind his back. "They're awake," he said simply. The council was silent. Even the most hardened warlords had nothing to say. The High Arbiter's mask remained still, unreadable. "We have failed." Varek's jaw tightened. "We should have eradicated them when we had the chance." The Arbiters shook their head. "No, you do not understand. This was never about conquest." They gestured toward the swirling rift visible on the war room's central display. "The humans were never the enemy. They were the prison." Varek's blood ran cold. The Council had kept Earth underdeveloped for a reason. They had monitored its progress not because of what lay beyond, but because of what lay beneath. And now, the lock had been broken. On Earth, the things emerging from the tear in the sky did not speak. They had no need for words. They were memory in form, something ancient that had been waiting to be set free. Evelyn felt them. In her bones. In her mind. And they felt her, too. A voice, not spoken but known, resonated within her. "You were not meant to forget." Images flooded her mind. Not her memories, but ones that should have been hers. A world before history, before humanity was something small, something caged. A time when they had not been just flesh and blood, but something greater. Something the Galactic Council had feared enough to bury. Patel staggered beside her, gripping his head. "Evelyn, do you feel that?" She did. Power. Not from the singularity drive, not from any machine, but from herself. From every human who had been touched by the anomaly. Because the anomaly wasn't an accident. It wasn't an error in physics. It was who they were supposed to be. The sky shuddered, the rift closing slightly as the entities took their first steps onto Earth. And Evelyn understood. They were not here to destroy. They were here to restore. Aboard the Veil of Dominion, panic rippled through the Council. Some called for retreat, others for war. But the High Arbiter knew the truth. "We cannot stop what has begun," they said, voice heavy with finality. "We are not their judges. We never were." Varek turned to them. "Then what do we do?" The Arbiter's gaze lingered on the planet below. "We survive." And for the first time in his life, Varek felt fear. Not for his fleet. Not for his empire. For the balance of the universe itself. On Earth, Evelyn Carter took a breath and stepped forward, toward the beings that had once been lost. The city pulsed, waiting. The sky trembled, sealing itself as the last of the ancient ones emerged. The Galactic Council had come to contain Earth. Now, it was Earth's turn to decide what happened next. Evelyn met the gaze of the one who had spoken into her mind. "What happens now?" she asked. The being tilted its head, considering her. "Now." It smiled, a purely human expression, despite being anything but. "Now we begin again."